Emma Clark walked through the gleaming entrance of Riverside Luxury Mall on a quiet Saturday morning. Her worn gray cardigan hanging loosely over a faded pair of jeans and simple white sneakers. The marble floors reflected the crystal chandeliers above, and designer storefronts sparkled with price tags that would make most people gasp. But Emma barely noticed the opulence surrounding her, moving through the space with the comfortable ease of someone who had nothing to prove. To the shoppers in their tailored suits and designer handbags, she looked completely out of place, a woman who had clearly wandered into the wrong zip code. Security Chief Richard Morrison certainly thought so. From his position near the central fountain, he watched her with narrowed eyes, his jaw tightening with disapproval. He prided himself on knowing exactly who belonged in his mall and who did not. What he did not know, what no one in that building could have possibly guessed, was that the woman in the threadbare cardigan owned every single square foot of the empire around her. They had no idea who they were about to humiliate. And what happened next would change everything. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Emma Clark pushed open the heavy glass doors of Riverside Luxury Mall at precisely 9:30 in the morning, just as the first stores were lifting their security gates and the scent of fresh coffee began drifting from the gourmet cafe on the first floor. She had chosen her outfit carefully that morning, the same way she did every time she made these visits, pulling on her most comfortable pair of jeans with the worn knees and the soft gray cardigan that had seen her through countless quiet weekends at home. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was free of makeup except for a touch of lip balm. To anyone watching, she looked like someone who had perhaps taken a wrong turn on their way to the outlet mall across town. The Riverside Luxury Mall was her masterpiece, though no one here today would know it. 5 years ago, this had been nothing but an abandoned lot on the edge of the city, a wasteland of cracked concrete and rusted chain-link fencing that everyone said was impossible to develop. Emma had seen something different. She had envisioned soaring atriums filled with natural light, water features that would make people stop and breathe, a careful selection of retailers that would transform this forgotten corner into a destination. She had poured her heart, her vision, and a significant portion of her fortune into making it real. Now it stood as one of the most successful luxury shopping centers in the region, with waiting lists for retail space and profit margins that made her investors very happy indeed. But Emma had never been interested in the trappings that usually came with that kind of success. She drove a modest sedan, lived in a comfortable but unremarkable house, and made a point of visiting her properties incognito at least twice a month. These anonymous walks taught her more than any corporate report ever could. She saw how the staff treated customers when they thought no boss was watching. She noticed which stores maintained their standards and which cut corners. She observed the small kindnesses and the subtle cruelties that made up the daily rhythm of retail life. Her father had taught her that lesson years ago, back when he was building his own modest construction company. "Stay humble," he had said. "Never forget what it is like to be on the other side of the counter." Emma had built an empire on that philosophy, and she was not about to abandon it now. Emma stepped into the main atrium and paused for just a moment, allowing herself a quiet moment of pride in what she had created. The space soared 3 stories high, with natural light pouring through the geometric skylight overhead. A massive fountain dominated the center, its water dancing in choreographed patterns that children loved to watch. The polished white marble floors gleamed under the carefully positioned spotlights, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers from the arrangements that were replaced every 3 days. She noticed a well-dressed woman in a cream-colored suit glance her way, then quickly look away with a subtle wrinkle of her nose, as though Emma's casual appearance might somehow be contagious. A teenager in designer sneakers that probably cost more than Emma's entire outfit whispered something to his friend, and they both smirked in her direction. Emma had seen these reactions before, and they no longer stung the way they once might have. She simply noted them, filed them away as data points about human nature and the assumptions people made based on nothing more than fabric and labels. As she walked toward the East Wing, she noticed Miguel, one of the maintenance staff, struggling with a rolling cart near the directory. His cleaning supplies had shifted during transport, and bottles of solution and packages of paper towels were scattered across the floor. He was kneeling down, trying to gather everything quickly while shoppers stepped around him with annoyed expressions, as though his presence was an inconvenience they should not have to endure. Emma did not hesitate. She knelt down beside him and began picking up the fallen items, handing them to Miguel with a warm smile. His eyes widened with surprise, clearly not expecting help from anyone, let alone a customer. "Thank you," he said softly, his accent thick with gratitude. "You did not have to do that." Emma shook her head. "Of course I did," she replied. "We all drop things sometimes." From his position in the security office on the second floor, Richard Morrison watched the scene unfold on one of the dozen monitors arranged in front of him. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he observed the woman in the threadbare cardigan crouching on his pristine floor. He did not see an act of kindness. He saw someone who looked out of place, someone who was now quite literally on the ground in the middle of his mall. Morrison prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it started. And everything about this woman screamed wrong to him. Her clothes, her posture, the way she seemed too comfortable in a space that should have intimidated her. He made a mental note to keep watching her. People like that, he thought, always ended up causing problems. Emma continued her tour through the mall, moving from store to store with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. She entered a high-end home goods boutique first, running her fingers along the Egyptian cotton bedsheets and examining the stitching on decorative pillows that cost more than some people's monthly rent. The sales associate, a woman in her 40s wearing an impeccably tailored black dress, took one look at Emma and suddenly became very busy rearranging a display at the far end of the store. Emma waited near the counter for several minutes, but the woman never approached, never offered assistance, never even made eye contact. Emma simply smiled to herself and moved on, making a mental note about the store's customer service standards. The next 3 stores followed a similar pattern. At the jewelry counter, a clerk looked right through her as though she were invisible. At the shoe boutique, a salesman actually stepped in front of her to help a woman in a Chanel suit, even though Emma had been there first. She observed it all with the detached interest of a scientist studying behavior in the wild, seeing her observations confirmed again and again. People judged quickly and harshly based on nothing more than appearance. It was when she entered a boutique called Threads that something different happened. The store specialized in contemporary women's fashion, with clean lines and artistic window displays that had caught Emma's eye during her last visit. She was examining a beautifully constructed blazer, admiring the quality of the tailoring, when a young woman approached with a genuine smile. "Good morning," the sales associate said warmly. "That piece is gorgeous, is it not? The construction is incredible. The designer actually sources the fabric from a family-owned mill in Italy." Emma looked up, slightly surprised by the enthusiasm in the young woman's voice. Her name tag read Sophie, and she could not have been more than 25, with kind eyes and an earnest demeanor that seemed refreshingly authentic. "I was noticing the stitching," Emma replied, turning the jacket to show the interior seams. "You do not see this kind of attention to detail very often anymore." Sophie's face lit up. "Exactly! That is exactly what I love about this line. The designer believes that what is inside matters as much as what people see on the outside." She paused, then added, "Can I show you a few other pieces? We just got a new collection in yesterday that I think you might appreciate." Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest, a recognition of genuine human decency. Here was someone who saw a person, not a price tag, someone who offered respect and attention regardless of how that person was dressed. "Yes," Emma said, her smile becoming real for the first time that morning. "I would like that very much." Richard Morrison had been watching the woman in the gray cardigan for nearly 40 minutes now, tracking her progress from camera to camera as she moved through his mall like she had every right to be there. His jaw tightened as he observed her lingering in stores, touching merchandise, wasting the time of his retail partners. He had worked in security for 23 years, the last 8 of those at the prestigious Continental Grand Hotel, before taking this position as security chief at Riverside Luxury Mall 3 years ago. At the Continental, he had learned the importance of maintaining standards, of understanding that certain establishments were meant for certain types of people, and that part of his job was to ensure that everyone knew where they belonged. The Continental had taught him to spot the difference between genuine wealth and people who were merely pretending, to read the subtle signals of class and status that separated the deserving from the pretenders. He prided himself on his ability to assess someone within seconds, to know from their shoes, their watch, their posture whether they were truly Continental material or whether they needed to be gently but firmly redirected elsewhere. He had brought that same philosophy to Riverside, and it had served him well. The mall had a reputation now, a certain cachet that came from careful curation, not just of stores but of clientele. Jake Anderson, his junior security officer, was making his rounds when Morrison called him back to the office. Jake was 26, eager to please, and still learning the nuances of high-end retail security. Morrison gestured to the monitor, showing Emma now in the boutique called Threads, speaking with that overly friendly salesgirl Sophie. "What do you see?" Jake asked, leaning closer to the screen. Morrison crossed his arms over his chest, the fabric of his expensive navy suit stretching slightly across his shoulders. "I see someone who has been wandering this mall for nearly an hour, and someone who clearly does not fit the profile of our typical customer, someone who is now taking up the valuable time of our retail partners." Jake frowned, uncertain. "Maybe she is just shopping, sir." Morrison shook his head slowly, his expression one of patient disappointment at his junior officer's naivete. "In my experience, people like that do not just shop in places like this. They browse, they waste time, they make our legitimate customers uncomfortable. Sometimes they are looking for opportunities to steal. Sometimes they are just looking for attention. Either way, they do not belong here, and it is our job to maintain the standards that make Riverside what it is." He straightened his signature burgundy tie and picked up his radio. "I am going down there to have a conversation with her. Time to remind everyone what kind of establishment we are running here." Emma had just thanked Sophie and was making her way back toward the main concourse when she noticed a man in a dark navy suit walking purposefully in her direction. There was something in his stride, in the set of his shoulders, that told her this was not a casual approach. She had seen that walk before, the walk of someone who believed they held authority and intended to use it. Richard Morrison closed the distance between them with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving her face. When he was close enough that other shoppers would be able to hear, he stopped and arranged his features into an expression that might have passed for politeness if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. "I am Richard Morrison, Chief of Security for Riverside Luxury Mall. Do you need some assistance finding your way?" Emma met his gaze steadily, recognizing the condescension wrapped in false courtesy. "No, thank you," she replied calmly. "I am quite familiar with the layout." Morrison's smile tightened. "I see. It is just that I have been observing you for some time now, and you seem to be wandering rather aimlessly through our establishment. Are you looking for something specific?" Emma took a slow breath, keeping her voice even and measured. "I am shopping," she said simply. Morrison let out a small laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "Shopping? Of course." He looked her up and down with unconcealed judgment, his eyes lingering on her worn cardigan and faded jeans. "Miss, I hope you will not take this the wrong way, but Riverside caters to a very particular clientele. Our stores carry luxury brands with price points that reflect their exclusivity. I just want to make sure you understand the kind of establishment this is." Emma felt a familiar heaviness settle in her chest, the disappointment she always felt when people revealed exactly who they were. "I understand perfectly what kind of establishment this is," she said quietly. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone that somehow felt even more insulting than his public display. "Look, I am sure you are a nice person, but people like you do not typically shop in places like this. It makes our regular customers uncomfortable. It raises questions. I am trying to save you some embarrassment here." Emma's hands remained relaxed at her sides, her posture straight but not aggressive. "I have every right to be here, Mr. Morrison. I am not causing any disturbance. I am simply looking at merchandise in stores that are open to the public. Is there a dress code I am unaware of? Morrison's expression hardened at Emma's quiet defiance, his false veneer of politeness beginning to crack. A dress code, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. No, miss, we do not have a formal dress code. What we do have are standards, expectations, a certain understanding among our clientele about what is appropriate for an establishment of this caliber. He paused, looking around to ensure his words were carrying to the growing number of shoppers who had slowed their pace to watch the confrontation unfold. A woman with multiple shopping bags stopped near the fountain, her eyes darting between Morrison and Emma with undisguised curiosity. An older couple paused by the directory, whispering to each other behind raised hands. A teenager lifted his phone, angling it toward the scene. Morrison seemed to feed off the attention, his chest puffing slightly. "Let me ask you a direct question," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Can you actually afford to purchase anything in these stores? Because in my experience, people who can afford to shop at Riverside do not show up looking like they just rolled out of bed. They respect the environment. They understand that luxury shopping is an experience, and part of that experience is maintaining a certain atmosphere." Emma felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her now, felt the familiar sting of public judgment that she had hoped humanity might have evolved beyond. She kept her voice steady, refusing to let him see her hurt. "My ability to afford anything here is not your concern, Mr. Morrison. I am prepared to make purchases if I find items I want. I have not violated any policies, and I am not leaving simply because you have decided I do not look wealthy enough for your standards." Morrison let out a harsh laugh that echoed across the marble floors. "Oh, I have decided, have I?" He gestured broadly at the gathered crowd. "Look around you, miss. Look at the people who actually belong here. Do you see anyone else dressed like they are about to do yard work? This is not a community center. This is not a thrift store. This is Riverside Luxury Mall. And we maintain a certain standard of clientele because that is what our legitimate customers expect and deserve." A murmur ran through the watching crowd, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Emma stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, and took another slow, steadying breath. Morrison took another step forward, his voice now loud enough that even shoppers on the second-floor balcony could hear every word. "Furthermore, miss, I have serious concerns about your intentions here. You have been wandering this mall for over an hour now, moving from store to store, touching merchandise, taking up the time of our sales associates, but I have not seen you make a single purchase. In my professional opinion, this constitutes loitering, and it raises some very serious red flags about potential theft." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Emma felt the crowd's energy shift immediately, felt the suspicion bloom in their eyes as they reassessed her with this new framework. Morrison was playing to his audience now, his gestures broad and authoritative. "I have 23 years of experience in luxury retail security," he announced, turning slightly to address the onlookers as much as Emma. "I know the patterns, I know the behaviors. People who come into establishments like this with genuine intent to purchase do not dress like they are cleaning out their garage. They do not spend an hour handling merchandise they have no intention of buying, and they certainly do not argue when security personnel ask them reasonable questions about their presence." Emma's voice remained calm, but gained an edge of steel. "Mr. Morrison, I would like to speak with your supervisor or with mall management immediately. These accusations are baseless and inappropriate." Morrison's face split into a smile that was all triumph and no warmth. He straightened his burgundy tie with a theatrical flourish and spread his hands wide. "Miss, I am management. I am the chief of security for this entire facility. There is no one for you to appeal to except me, and I am telling you right now that your presence here is no longer welcome. You have exactly 5 minutes to exit this property, or I will have you removed for trespassing." The crowd murmured again, some pulling out phones to record, others nodding in approval at Morrison's firm handling of the situation. Emma looked at him for a long moment, seeing not anger in his eyes but absolute certainty in his righteousness. The unwavering belief that he was protecting his mall from exactly the kind of person who did not belong. "Very well. she said quietly. "I will leave. But I think you are going to regret this decision very much. Mr. Morrison." The crowd's reactions split like a fault line through the gathered shoppers. Some nodded with satisfied expressions, clearly agreeing with Morrison's assessment that someone dressed like Emma had no business in their exclusive space. A man in an expensive suit muttered something about standards to his companion, loud enough to be heard. The woman with the shopping bags shifted them to her other arm and smirked, as though Morrison had done exactly what needed to be done. But others looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting away, their faces troubled by the public humiliation they were witnessing, even if they lacked the courage to speak against it. An elderly woman near the fountain frowned deeply, her hand clutching her purse tighter as though the whole scene had left a sour taste in her mouth. A young mother pulled her daughter closer, whispering something the child clearly did not understand. The silence was broken by a clear, trembling voice from the edge of the crowd. "Excuse me, but this is not right." Sophie stepped forward from where she had been watching near the entrance to Threads, her face flushed, but her chin raised with determination. "That woman has been nothing but kind and respectful. She was genuinely interested in our merchandise. She knows more about quality and craftsmanship than half the people who shop here. You have no right to treat her this way based on how she is dressed." Morrison's head snapped toward Sophie, his eyes flashing with anger at this unexpected challenge to his authority. "And who are you?" he demanded. Sophie swallowed hard, but held her ground. "I am Sophie Reeves. I work at Threads, and I am telling you that you are wrong about her." Morrison's expression turned dangerous, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "Miss Reeves, I suggest you return to your store immediately, and remember that your employment here depends on maintaining the standards we have established. If you cannot support mall security and protecting the interests of this establishment, perhaps you should consider whether Threads is the right place for you. Or perhaps I should have a conversation with your manager about employees who interfere with security operations." Sophie paled, but did not move, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Emma turned to look at the young woman, her heart breaking at the courage it must have taken to speak up, at the risk Sophie was taking for a stranger. "It is all right," Emma said softly, her voice gentle. "Please do not jeopardize your job for me. I appreciate what you tried to do more than you know." She took another deep, steadying breath and began walking toward the exit, her head high and her steps measured, refusing to give Morrison the satisfaction of seeing her run. Morrison lifted his radio to his mouth, his thumb pressing the button with decisive force. "Jake, bring Davis and meet me at the main entrance. We are escorting someone off the property." His voice carried across the atrium, ensuring that everyone present understood the severity of the situation. Within moments, 2 additional security officers appeared, their presence transforming Emma's departure from a simple exit into a formal expulsion. Jake looked uncertain, his eyes questioning. But Davis, an older officer with a weathered face, simply took his position without comment. Morrison gestured toward the doors with an exaggerated sweep of his arm. "After you, miss. I will make sure you find your way out without any further confusion about where you do or do not belong." Emma walked toward the exit with quiet dignity, her spine straight and her head held high. She did not rush, did not stumble, did not show any of the humiliation that Morrison so clearly wanted to inflict upon her. The crowd parted before her like a sea, some avoiding her eyes, others staring with open curiosity. The click of her simple sneakers on the marble floor seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden hush that had fallen over the concourse. Morrison followed several paces behind, flanked by his officers, and as they walked, he began to speak, his voice carrying with the practiced projection of someone delivering a sermon. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here today," he announced, turning to address the shoppers who lined their path. "Riverside Luxury Mall is not just a collection of stores. It is an experience, a standard, a promise to our valued customers that they will shop in an environment befitting their status and expectations. Part of my job, part of what I do every single day, is to ensure that this standard is maintained. That means making difficult decisions. That means sometimes having uncomfortable conversations, but it is necessary to preserve what makes Riverside special." They reached the main entrance, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal the parking lot beyond. Emma paused at the threshold and turned to face Morrison one final time, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "I think you are going to regret this decision. I truly do." Morrison threw back his head and laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Oh, I am sure I will lose sleep over it," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Go on now. Find a mall more suited to your budget. Maybe try the outlets. They are much more your speed." Emma stepped through the doors without another word, and Morrison watched her go with a satisfied smile, already turning back to address his audience with the air of a man who had just performed a great public service. Emma walked to her car, a modest gray sedan parked in the far corner of the lot where she always positioned it during her anonymous visits. Her hands were steady as she unlocked the door, but she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before pulling out her phone, allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The humiliation, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty in Morrison's voice that he was right to judge her, to dismiss her, to publicly shame her based on nothing but the clothes she wore. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed the number for David Patterson, her business partner and the senior lawyer for Clark Property Group. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Emma, what a nice surprise. How is your Saturday going?" Emma let out a long, slow breath. "David, I need you to come to Riverside immediately. Something has happened." The warmth in David's voice vanished instantly, replaced by sharp concern. "What is wrong? Are you hurt? Is there an emergency?" "No," Emma said, her voice tired but controlled. "I am physically fine, but I was just forcibly removed from my own mall by the head of security." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then David's voice came back, incredulous and growing angry. "I am sorry, what? You were what?" Emma recounted the entire incident, from Morrison's initial approach to his accusations of loitering and potential theft, to the theatrical escort out of the building in front of dozens of witnesses. She kept her voice factual and measured, but David could hear the exhaustion underneath, the weariness of someone who had hoped for better from humanity and been disappointed once again. "That son of a—" David started, but Emma cut him off. "David, I need you to handle this properly. Contact Sarah Chen immediately and have her meet us at the mall administration office in 30 minutes. Pull Morrison's employment file. I want to know his history, his training records, everything. And David, this needs to be done by the book. Documentation, witnesses, proper procedures. We are not going to sink to his level." David's voice was grim. "I will be there in 20 minutes. Emma, I am so sorry this happened." Emma looked back at the gleaming facade of Riverside, at the building she had dreamed into existence. "I know you are," she said softly. "Now let us go make sure it never happens to anyone else." 32 minutes later, Emma returned to Riverside Luxury Mall. But this time, she did not enter through the main public entrance. She walked through the executive access door on the east side of the building, the one marked staff only that required a key card for entry. David Patterson walked beside her, his silver hair perfectly combed and his expression thunderous despite his expensive charcoal suit. Sarah Chen, the building management director, hurried to meet them in the corridor, her face pale and her usual composure visibly shaken. "Emma, I cannot even begin to apologize," Sarah began, but Emma raised a gentle hand. "Let us handle this properly first," Emma said quietly. "Then we can talk about apologies and what comes next." The three of them made their way through the back corridors toward the security office, their footsteps echoing on the utilitarian tile that the public never saw. They emerged onto the second-floor balcony overlooking the main concourse, and Emma could see Morrison below, standing near the fountain with Jake, clearly recounting his triumphant ejection of the troublesome woman to his junior officer. Morrison noticed them first, his security training making him perpetually aware of movement on the upper levels. His eyes tracked their progress with mild curiosity, noting Sarah's presence but not yet understanding its significance. When they descended the escalator and began walking directly toward him, his confusion deepened. Sarah Chen rarely involved herself in security matters, and the man in the expensive suit beside the woman looked like a lawyer, which usually meant trouble of some kind. But Morrison's confidence remained intact, bolstered by his earlier victory and his absolute certainty in his own judgment. He straightened his burgundy tie and stepped forward to meet them, his expression one of professional concern, mixed with faint annoyance at whatever bureaucratic issue was about to waste his time. "Mrs. Chen," he said, nodding respectfully. "Is there a problem? I was just handling a security situation earlier, removed a suspicious individual who was loitering. Everything is under control." Sarah's expression was grim, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice tight and formal. "We need to speak with you immediately in the executive conference room." Morrison frowned, still not understanding. "Can this wait? I am in the middle of my shift." "No," David said, his voice cold as winter steel. "It absolutely cannot wait." David reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, holding it out to Morrison with deliberate slowness. "David Patterson, Senior Counsel for Clark Property Group. I represent Miss Clark in all legal and business matters related to her extensive real estate holdings." Morrison took the card reflexively, his eyes scanning the embossed letters, his brain not yet making the connections it needed to make. "Clark Property Group," he repeated slowly, looking up at Sarah for clarification. "What does this have to do with the security incident?" Emma stepped forward, and Morrison's eyes finally focused on her face, recognition flickering as he realized this was the woman he had ejected less than an hour ago. His confusion deepened, mixing now with the first hint of something that might have been unease. "Mr. Morrison," Emma said, her voice calm and steady and utterly without malice. "I am Emma Clark. I own this mall. I own the entire Riverside property development. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Clark Property Group." The color began to drain from Morrison's face, starting at his cheeks and spreading downward to his neck. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened. Again. "That is?" he stammered. "That is not. You cannot be. You were dressed like, and you looked like." Emma simply stood there, waiting, watching as the reality of his catastrophic mistake began to settle over him like a suffocating blanket. Sarah stepped forward, her voice formal and carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Morrison, I can confirm that this is indeed Emma Clark. She purchased this property 5 years ago, oversaw every aspect of its development and construction, and has owned and operated Riverside Luxury Mall since its opening. She is not only the owner of this facility but also your ultimate employer. Everything you did this morning, every word you said, every accusation you made, was directed at the woman who signs your paychecks." Morrison swayed slightly on his feet, his hand reaching out to steady himself against a nearby planter. The burgundy tie that he had straightened so confidently now seemed to be choking him. His eyes darted between Emma, David, and Sarah, desperately searching for some indication that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the truth that was becoming horrifyingly clear. David pulled a tablet from his leather briefcase and swiped through several screens before turning it to face Morrison. "These are the property deeds for the Riverside development, filed with the county 5 years ago," he said, his voice clinical and precise. "Purchaser, Emma Louise Clark. Here is the corporate structure of Clark Property Group. Registered as a privately held company with Emma Clark as founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer. Here are the last 3 years of financial reports showing the mall's performance under her ownership. And here," he swiped again, "are the articles published in Commercial Real Estate Weekly and Regional Business Journal profiling Emma as one of the most successful property developers in the state." David turned the tablet back to show Morrison a photo from one of the articles. Emma in professional attire standing in front of a building under construction. The same face, the same eyes. Unmistakably the woman standing before him now. Morrison's face had gone from pale to a sickly gray, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the climate-controlled air. His hand trembled as he reached out toward the tablet, then pulled back as though touching it would make the truth more real. "I did not," he whispered hoarsely. "I could not have known. You were dressed like, how was I supposed to?" The words died in his throat as shoppers began to gather once again, drawn by the security presence and the obvious distress of the man who had been so confident and authoritative just an hour before. Emma noticed phones lifting, the same phones that had recorded her humiliation, now turning to capture Morrison's reckoning. A woman near the fountain whispered urgently to her companion, pointing at Emma. The teenager who had filmed earlier actually gasped audibly, his eyes wide with the realization of what he had witnessed. Morrison's entire world was crumbling around him in real time. Every assumption he had made about status and appearances, and who deserved respect, revealed as catastrophically wrong. His professional reputation, his authority, his certainty in his own judgment, all of it dissolving like salt in water. He had not just insulted a customer, he had publicly humiliated his own employer, accused her of criminal intent, and expelled her from her own property in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. The full magnitude of his mistake crashed over him like a tidal wave. Morrison stumbled backward, his hand clutching at his chest as though he could not quite catch his breath. "Miss Clark!" he gasped. "Miss Clark, I did not, please. You have to understand, I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the mall. I thought," his voice cracked and rose in pitch, the smooth professional tone completely gone, replaced by raw panic. "Emma, please, I have a family, I have a mortgage, I made a mistake. Anyone could have made the same mistake." His hands were shaking visibly now, reaching toward her in supplication before dropping to his sides in helpless desperation. His eyes darted around at the watching crowd, at the phones recording his complete unraveling, and something broke behind his expression. 23 years, he whispered, his voice thick. 23 years I have been in security. I thought I was good at this. Emma looked at him for a long moment, her expression neither angry nor vindictive, simply deeply, profoundly disappointed. "That is the problem, Mr. Morrison," she said quietly. "You thought you knew. You thought you could determine someone's worth, someone's right to be treated with basic human dignity, based on the cost of their clothing. You did not see a person standing in front of you. You saw a costume, and you decided that costume gave you permission to humiliate me publicly, to accuse me of criminal intent, to make me feel unwelcome in a space I built with my own vision and resources." Morrison's face crumpled, tears actually forming in his eyes as the reality settled over him with crushing finality. "I have lost everything," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "My job, my reputation, everything I worked for." Sarah Chen stepped forward, her voice formal and carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Mr. Morrison, effective immediately, your employment is suspended pending a full investigation into this incident and a comprehensive review of your conduct as head of security. You will surrender your badge, your keys, and any other mall property in your possession. You are not to return to these premises except for scheduled meetings related to the investigation. Do you understand?" Morrison nodded numbly, his hands fumbling at his belt for his badge. His professional veneer not just cracked but completely shattered, revealing the frightened, broken man underneath. Emma and Sarah made their way to the executive office suite on the 3rd floor, a space that Emma had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire mall below. David followed close behind, his briefcase in hand and his expression still tight with barely controlled anger on Emma's behalf. The office was furnished simply despite its size, with a large conference table and comfortable chairs that Emma had chosen for function rather than ostentation. Sarah immediately pulled up the security footage on the large monitor mounted on the wall, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "I need to see exactly what happened," she said, her voice strained. "I need to understand the full scope of this." The footage began to play, showing Emma's arrival that morning, her simple clothing stark against the marble and crystal of the mall's entrance. They watched in silence as the events unfolded exactly as Emma had described. Morrison's approach, his condescending interrogation, the public accusations, the theatrical escort to the exit. Sarah's hand covered her mouth as Morrison's voice came through the speakers, His words about people like you and maintaining standards echoing in the quiet office. When the footage ended, Sarah turned to Emma, her face flushed with mortification. "Emma, I am so deeply sorry," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "This is inexcusable. This is not what Riverside stands for. This is not what you built this place to be. As building management director, I take full responsibility for not catching this kind of behavior before it reached this point." Emma sat down slowly in one of the conference chairs, her exhaustion finally showing in the slight slump of her shoulders. "Sarah, you are not responsible for Morrison's choices," she said gently, "but we are responsible for what we do next. We need to think carefully about the appropriate consequences, not just for him, but for what this means for our policies, our training, our culture." David leaned forward, his lawyer's instincts engaged. "Emma, the man publicly humiliated you, accused you of criminal intent, and violated basic principles of customer service and human decency. Termination is not just appropriate, it is the obvious response." Emma nodded slowly, her fingers steepled in front of her face as she considered. "But I keep thinking about what my father used to say. People make mistakes. The question is whether they can learn from them, whether they can become better. If we just fire Morrison, he walks away angry and bitter, convinced he was treated unfairly. And he never actually confronts what he did wrong or why he did it." Emma looked up from her steepled fingers, her decision made after careful consideration of justice, mercy, and what would truly serve everyone involved. "Here is what I want to do," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Morrison will not be terminated immediately, but his position as head of security is over. He will be demoted to a regular security officer position, the lowest level we have. His salary will be adjusted accordingly. He will be required to complete a comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training program, not just a few online modules, but actual meaningful education about bias, assumptions, and the impact of his actions. He will be on probation for 1 full year, during which any similar incident will result in immediate termination. And he will issue a formal written apology, not just to me, but to Sophie Reeves and anyone else who was affected by his behavior." David's eyebrows rose sharply. "Emma, are you certain about this? The man deserves to lose his job." Sarah looked equally stunned, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process Emma's unexpected mercy. "Miss Clark, I appreciate your compassion, but I have to agree with David. Morrison's actions were egregious. Giving him another chance might send the wrong message to our other employees." Emma shook her head slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I understand your concerns. And believe me, I spent the entire drive here considering whether termination was the right answer. But I keep coming back to this question. What actually creates change? If we fire Morrison, he becomes a victim in his own narrative. He will tell himself and everyone who will listen that he made one mistake and lost everything. That he was treated unfairly. That we overreacted. He will never actually confront the ugliness of what he did or examine the assumptions that led him to do it. But if we give him this chance, if we make him work alongside the people he looked down on, if we force him to educate himself and face the consequences of his actions every single day, then maybe he becomes a better person. Maybe he learns something real about human dignity and worth. This is not about being soft," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "This is about being strategic, about creating actual change. Morrison made his beliefs very public today. Dozens of people watched him humiliate me. Let those same people watch him learn, watch him grow, watch him become someone different. That is a far more powerful message than simply erasing him." Sarah nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "You are turning this into a teaching moment for everyone, not just Morrison." After the meeting concluded and the necessary documentation was prepared, Emma made her way back down to the main floor, her steps purposeful as she headed toward Threads. The boutique was quiet, with only a few customers browsing the racks, and Sophie was folding a display of scarves near the window when Emma entered. The young woman looked up, her eyes widening with recognition and then immediate concern, as though she feared she might be in trouble for her earlier intervention. "Sophie," Emma said warmly, approaching with a gentle smile. Do you have a moment to speak privately? Sophie nodded quickly, her hands twisting nervously together. I am so sorry if I overstepped earlier, she began, but Emma raised a hand to stop her. You have nothing to apologize for, Emma said firmly. In fact, I came here specifically to thank you. What you did took extraordinary courage. You risked your job, your livelihood, to stand up for a stranger who was being treated unfairly. That kind of integrity is rare and precious, and I want you to know how much it meant to me. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling slightly. It was not right, what he was doing. I could not just stand there and watch. You were so kind when you were in here earlier, and you knew more about quality and craftsmanship than most of our customers. It just made me so angry that he was judging you based on your clothes. Emma reached out and gently squeezed Sophie's shoulder. That anger you felt, that sense of injustice, that is exactly the kind of value system I want to cultivate in every single person who works in my properties. Which brings me to why I am really here. Sophie, how would you feel about a promotion to assistant manager of threads? It comes with a significant salary increase, benefits, and the opportunity to help train other staff members in the kind of customer service excellence you demonstrated today. Sophie's tears spilled over, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to process what she was hearing. Are you serious? She whispered. You are offering me a promotion? Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I am very serious. I believe in rewarding people who do the right thing, especially when it is difficult. You showed me today that you understand what really matters. That every person who walks through these doors deserves respect and dignity, regardless of how they are dressed or what they can afford. That is the culture I want to build here. And I need people like you to help me do it. Morrison stood in what had been his office for 3 years, methodically placing his personal items into a cardboard box that felt like a coffin for his career. The framed commendation from the Continental Grand Hotel came down first. The certificate that had once filled him with such pride, now feeling like evidence of a life built on fundamentally flawed assumptions. His nameplate, the expensive pen set his wife had given him for his 50th birthday. The photo of his family taken at his daughter's graduation. All of it went into the box with hands that still trembled slightly. Through the window overlooking the security monitors, he could see Jake and Davis working the floor below, and the distance between where he stood now and where he would be tomorrow felt like a canyon he could never cross. Jake appeared in the doorway, his young face uncertain and uncomfortable. Mr. Morrison, I just wanted to say, he started, then stopped, clearly unsure how to finish. Morrison looked at him and saw something he had never noticed before in his junior officer's expression. Not respect or admiration, but pity mixed with wariness, the way someone might look at a dog that had bitten without warning. You can just call me Richard now, Morrison said quietly. We are colleagues now, not supervisor and subordinate. Jake nodded awkwardly and retreated without another word, leaving Morrison alone with his box and his thoughts. For 3 hours that afternoon, Morrison sat in the empty office and forced himself to watch the security footage of the incident. Every moment of his interaction with Emma Clark played back in unforgiving detail. He watched himself approach her with that condescending smile, heard his own voice dripping with judgment and superiority, saw the way he had performed for the crowd, like his cruelty was something to be proud of. The man on the screen seemed like a stranger, yet Morrison could not deny that it was him, that every word and action had come from beliefs he had held so deeply he had never questioned them. He had genuinely believed he was protecting the mall, maintaining standards, doing his job well. He had looked at Emma Clark and seen only her clothes, only her failure to signal wealth in the ways he had been conditioned to recognize, and from that single observation he had constructed an entire narrative about who she was and what she deserved. It had never occurred to him to wonder what kind of person she might be beneath the simple cardigan. What kind of life she might have lived. What kind of worth existed beyond the visible markers of status and class. 6 months had passed since that morning in October, and Riverside Luxury Mall had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. Morrison walked his patrol route in the standard security uniform. No longer the tailored navy suit and burgundy tie that had once signaled his authority. He had completed his diversity and sensitivity training the previous month, 8 weeks of intensive coursework that had forced him to confront not just his actions, but the entire framework of assumptions that had guided his life. The classes had been uncomfortable, often painful, requiring him to examine his own biases about class, appearance, and worth in ways that left him feeling stripped bare and exposed. But something genuine had shifted in him during those long sessions. Listening to stories from people whose experiences he had never considered, learning about the real harm caused by the kind of casual judgments he had made so freely. He worked alongside Miguel now. The janitor Emma had helped that morning, and had learned that Miguel had a degree in engineering from his home country, and was working toward his certification here while supporting 3 children. He had partnered with Sophie on a customer service initiative, watching her thrive in her new role as assistant manager. Her insights about genuine respect and dignity shaping new training protocols for all mall staff. Emma had implemented sweeping policy changes across all Clark Property Group holdings, new anti-discrimination guidelines that were clear and enforceable, mandatory training for all employees, regardless of position, and a confidential reporting system for anyone who experienced or witnessed biased treatment. Morrison had watched these changes roll out, knowing that his catastrophic mistake had been the catalyst, feeling the weight of that responsibility every single day. He saw Emma occasionally during her visits to the mall, and she always nodded to him with quiet acknowledgement, neither warm nor cold, simply present. Morrison never tried to thank her for the mercy she had shown him, sensing somehow that she did not want his gratitude, only his genuine transformation. He was different now, humbled in ways that went deeper than mere embarrassment, aware of how much he had not known about the world and the people in it. When he saw someone enter the mall in simple clothing, his first instinct was no longer judgment but curiosity about their story, recognition that appearance revealed nothing about character or worth. Emma sat in her home office on a Sunday evening, looking out at the city lights and thinking about everything that had happened in the 6 months since that October morning. The incident with Morrison had taught her something profound about human nature, about the ease with which people constructed hierarchies based on nothing but surface observations, about how deeply ingrained these patterns of judgment ran in society. But it had also shown her something hopeful, that people could change when given the opportunity and the right circumstances. That transformation was possible even for those who seemed most locked into their prejudices. She still dressed simply when she visited her properties, still wore her comfortable jeans and worn cardigan, still walked through her buildings as an anonymous observer rather than an announced executive. Some might have expected her to change this practice after what happened, to protect herself from future humiliation by announcing her status clearly through expensive clothes and obvious markers of wealth. But Emma understood that would be exactly the wrong lesson to take from Morrison's mistake. The problem was never her clothing. The problem was a world that had taught people like Morrison to equate appearance with worth, to believe that respect was something earned through visible displays of status, rather than something owed to every human being simply by virtue of their humanity. True worth, Emma had learned from her father and proven through her own life, had nothing to do with designer labels or expensive accessories. It lived in how you treated people when you had power over them, in whether you chose kindness when cruelty would be easier, in whether you saw the person standing before you or only your own assumptions about them. If you have ever been judged unfairly based on how you looked, if you have ever felt the sting of being dismissed or diminished because you did not meet someone's arbitrary standards, then you understand why this matters so deeply. And if you have ever caught yourself making those same judgments about others, then you understand why we all need to examine our own hearts and ask ourselves what we truly value in other people. Share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance? Have you ever realized you were judging someone else unfairly? What did those moments teach you? Let us build a community where dignity and respect are not luxuries reserved for those who can afford the right costume, but basic rights extended to every person we encounter. Because in the end, we are all so much more than what we wear.